Are you a wounded witch? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I want to talk about the witch wound. I'm sure I've talked about the witch wound in other videos, but I just really wanted it to have its own video because I just feel like it's a really important topic and I really wanted to dive into it. The witch wound is something that has come up for me so much in my life, and I didn't really understand what it was, but then the first time someone explained to me what a witch wound was, it was like so many things just made so much sense to me. So if you're not familiar with the witch wound, it really is this fear that comes up very often in women that if we do something unconventional or sort of step outside of the social norm, we have this inner fear that we will be like burned as a witch. It's very much tied to ancestral trauma because for centuries, women who stepped outside of the normal conventions of society were actually literally burned as witches. And while there are still some societies where women will get brutally hurt if they do speak up or step outside of the conventional. In most of our modern day society, we won't necessarily literally get burned at the stake. However, in most of us, we do know that there are often consequences, especially for women, for being somewhat unconventional or stepping outside of the social norm. And oftentimes that fear of potential harm can come up within us even if we know we literally aren't going to be burned at the stake. Bear in mind the witch wound is not the only type of ancestral trauma that a person can carry, but it is something that can happen in anyone, but in most women we hold that within us. We hold that fear within us, and it can come out at some very unexpected times. I also think we need to acknowledge that there are some parts of the world today where women really are not allowed to speak up. They're not allowed to speak their mind or to do anything that may be considered outside of the cultural norm of society. And there are places still in the world today where women can face very, very drastic, life-threatening consequences for that. That said, I'm gonna assume that most of the people watching live in a society where you may not literally be killed or physically harmed necessarily for speaking your truth, for doing something that might be outside of the norms of society, or simply just being unique or being different. That said, you may not be attacked with torch-wielding villagers, but you might get attacked by internet trolls. You may face public scrutiny. You may face being shunned from your family, from your community in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just being gossiped about so you don't end up like in your same social circle or something like that. There are fears that come up within us as women that we may face some kind of painful consequence for simply doing something that we believe to be the right thing to do, we believe to be natural, or simply just being ourselves. And that's not to say that men don't go through a similar thing when they are dealing with facing their consequences, but I do think we have to acknowledge that in society, women are expected to sort of toe the line and do things based on the status quo, and when men step outside of their comfort zone, very often they're more celebrated. Not all the time, but it's more likely they will be celebrated. Whereas for women, we often get shunned. I think it's ironic because it's been my observation that starting from little girls, at least in my generation, women were very much pushed into this idea of being very masculine, of needing to be a career woman, needing to have structure and discipline. But we push women into that masculine, but then we shame them for being too masculine. But when women do try to tap into their feminine energy, true feminine energy is actually very unconventional in our society today. So women will then get shamed for not connecting to their feminine energy the right way, or really what society deems to be the right way for women to be feminine, which is really just a societal construct of what men deem to be an acceptable version of feminine energy. The good girl who is structured and disciplined, but she's structured and disciplined in a way that pleases a man, is really just kind of a watered down version of what masculine energy is, and it's sort of this forced or shamed submission. So basically women are taught that you have to be like a man in order to survive in society, but you can't be too powerful a man in society because then that will intimidate men. And men will say all day that they want a woman to be more feminine, but the reality is most men have no idea how to handle feminine energy. In reality, connecting to your feminine energy in today's world, in today's society, is a pretty radical act. It is. Especially if you are truly connecting to your actual feminine energy and not just the societal construct of the good girl, which is kind of what society tells us is feminine. That stuff, like the good girl, having manners, just being seen and not heard, being sweet, submissive, being a man's piece, all that kind of stuff, that's not true feminine energy. Like divine feminine energy is life, it's movement, it's openness and receptivity. I use this analogy all the time. It's like the ocean. The ocean can be calm and beautiful and serene. That's your light feminine energy. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's calm and cooling on a hot day. But it can also kill you if you mess with it. Like if you try to mess with the ocean and the ocean don't want you to mess with them, the ocean will kill you. It will destroy you. That's your dark feminine. And as women, we need both. We absolutely need both. Not to catch a man or to please a man, but because that is our birthright as women. So that's my little rant about feminine energy. So oftentimes as women, when we start working with our feminine energy, and this can come up with either our dark or our light feminine energy, a lot of times the fear can come up of, well, one thing, the fear can come up of being shunned from society, because traditionally in a society, women couldn't survive without a community, because a woman alone is much less likely to be able to protect herself in society. Not that she can't, but that she's less likely to be able to protect herself without a community of people around her. Women don't survive as well in isolation as men can. So as women, we have this, like, it's ingrained in us to feel like we need to fit in with society in order to be accepted and not be left alone to die. It's within us. Even though we consciously know that if we step outside of what the community or society is telling us, and we do lose some friends, we do lose some people in our life, we're not probably literally going to die, we still have that fear within us, so that can come up. And that's tied also to the witch wound of the fact that we may actually be turned on enough so that we may be taken down, we may be, you know, have people try to destroy us, try to discredit us even, or maybe even actually try to harm us. That's the witch wound that comes up. Now, while all feminine energy really is discouraged in our society because we're just really not comfortable with any kind of feminine energy in a woman, like true divine feminine energy, it's a little bit easier for people to get on board with light feminine energy. Dark feminine energy is the stuff that most people just can't handle. In fact, if someone is living from ego, particularly males, because there are a lot of men today that are living from ego, they will not be able to handle dark feminine energy. Just won't, because dark feminine energy destroys egos. Dark feminine energy is usually what ends up bringing up the witch wound. Although all feminine energy could really bring it up, because connecting to your feminine energy is really discouraged in our society. I have a full video talking about dark feminine energy, really diving into what it is and what it isn't. So I will link that video to this one. I also have a video that I posted recently about all of the dark feminine energy archetypes, and I do dive into the witch archetype, which is very much tied to the unconventions of society, as well as the wild woman. Really all of dark feminine energy is really kind of tied to aspects of the feminine that are a little bit more taboo in society. So I highly recommend you watch both of those videos. It'll dive into what I'm talking about a lot deeper. I do want to make a note though. Dark feminine energy, or what I'm talking about here as far as things that bring up the witch wound, they're not when you are reacting to a trauma. They are not when you are just getting triggered by your past traumas. And they're not about taking out your traumas and pain onto innocent bystanders. It's not about that. I've been posting stuff about dark feminine energy because I actually just released a book, the Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, which dives into this much deeper. However, the more that I've been talking about dark feminine energy, the more I've realized that a lot of people misinterpret that as a woman just sort of like abusing people or taking out their traumas and pain onto just innocent random people, and that's not what it is at all. So if you're someone who just has had a really rough day and you decide to go and like just take out your anger and like blow up at some salesperson who's just trying to help you or something, that's not dark feminine energy. That's your trauma and that's your pain. And we all have pain, we all have things we need to work through, but I encourage you to work through that and not just go around and try to just, you know, take out your anger and frustration on just innocent bystanders. It's also not like if you have pain towards your father, taking out that anger and frustration on your current romantic partner. It's not about that, right? This is about connecting to the shadow aspects, the dark parts of your feminine that are beautiful. There's so much beauty in darkness, but we can bring those to the light and accept them. Once you actually learn, and this dives into shadow work, which is a much deeper topic, but when you start bringing those sort of dark shadow parts of yourself out into the light and let them shine, there's so much beauty in that. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about keeping a heart open, and a lot of this is coming from a healed place. So I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm talking about by stepping outside of the social norm or embracing the unique parts of themselves as just projecting their trauma onto people. Your past trauma, the stuff you've been dealing with, is likely not your fault, but it is our responsibility to work on healing that. And if you are in a relationship with someone, whether that be a romantic partner or a family structure or friendship or something, at the end of the day, we have to love people through their traumas, but we also should not be projecting those traumas onto other people and causing them pain and harm because we're in pain. It's important that we heal. Just want to get that part out of the way. The witch wound is really what comes up very frequently when we are tapping into our feminine, particularly our dark feminine, and it brings up fears in us that something may harm us. When this comes up, it is not a sign that there's something wrong with you. It's not a sign necessarily that you shouldn't do something. I think oftentimes you can think of it as a little wake-up call, like a little alarm. Like, oh, I have this fear coming up. What's this fear? What's the root of it? Like, it's an invitation for you to ask questions about why the fear is coming up. Sometimes that fear may be coming up for you because maybe you do actually need to take a redirection. But sometimes that fear is just coming up for you, again, because you're just afraid of what might happen if you step outside the norms of society. And you need to ask yourself, okay, if I do this, am I actually gonna get burned at the stake as a witch? Likely the answer is probably no. And then you can move forward. I know for me, I've done a lot of healing work on myself, and these things still come up for me. And I think of them as an invitation to tune in, check in with myself, check in with reality, check in with, okay, am I actually safe in this moment? Is what I'm doing really the direction I want to go in? Sometimes it can actually open the door to some amazing creative experiences. It can open the door to some amazing pathways in life, maybe some that you wouldn't even think of. While the witch wound can be very painful and traumatic when we are going through it, I like to think of it as an invitation. It's an invitation to check in with your body. Now, the witch wound can come up for women anytime a woman steps outside of the social norms, anytime she expresses unique parts of herself, especially those that are maybe a little bit less acceptable in today's society. However, there are some really common areas that these tend to come up, and I want to touch on some of those. So some of these areas might be areas that you relate to in your life. Maybe some of them, maybe all of them. There may be other areas that come up. I'm just going to mention a few that are really common. Now, when I think about the witch wound, the first thing that comes up for me is, I think of the throat chakra, I think of the voice, I think of speaking, I think of speaking up and speaking my truth. That's what usually comes up for me. I know for me, I have a lot of throat chakra issues, which I've always found ironic because I had a lot of throat chakra stuff when I was a child, like reoccurring dreams where I would lose my voice completely. I would freeze in class when I would get called on and I wouldn't be able to speak. Like I'd actually lose my ability to speak when I would get in fear. A lot of that stuff would come up for me, and I always kind of find that ironic because I ended up spending 15 years working as a stand-up comedian. So like me on a stage with a microphone talking to a room full of people. That was my life for most of my adult life, and now I sit on a camera and talk to people. So talking is something that I do a lot. I was in theater for years, so I would get up on a stage and perform in front of audiences and things like that. So much of what I do is very vocal. but I still have a lot of throat chakra stuff that comes up for me. So speaking, voicing yourself, speaking up for yourself, speaking up and saying what you believe that may be not necessarily in line with society, that comes up for me. And I'm sure I'm not the only woman, because I know there's a lot of women that go into freeze responses when they panic, who have a lot of trouble voicing boundaries, saying their truth, speaking what's on their mind, saying things that might be a little unconventional, stuff like that. If that comes up for you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something as major as, you know, doing stand-up comedy, which I have to admit, I did stand-up comedy for so many years, which there's really not many other things in life that you can do that test the witch wound, really. Being a woman in a primarily male-dominated industry where you very often get up on a stage, oftentimes in front of a room full of men, and sometimes say things that are somewhat edgy, somewhat controversial. I wasn't afraid to push the envelope. I was a clean comic, but I was not afraid to sort of say things that would kind of stir things up sometimes. And it was so interesting because I'd never heard of the witch wound before, and then the first time someone explained to me the witch wound, that's what came up for me, was like, oh my god, that's why. I didn't really have stage fright, but like that whole world was really just like constantly facing the witch wound of constantly, you know, facing potential hecklers, or even just the silence of a room or something, like that fear of, oh, I'm gonna get up on stage. And there were times when I would try different comedy bits or try things that were somewhat edgy, or trying things that were made some people uncomfortable sometimes, that I'd face that resistance of like, ooh, should I say this? Is it okay for me to say this? Even though I know there were men that were saying things that were way more controversial, but there would be that, ooh, am I gonna be okay with saying this? Is this too far? Is this too edgy? That was the witch wound. Like, am I gonna get up? Am I gonna say something that is gonna piss people off and everybody's gonna revolt? So when I first heard about the witch wound, it was kind of like a real like, oh, that's what I've been feeling this whole time. Like, that really came up for me. There's been plenty of times on social media where this stuff has come up for me, where I've been getting ready to post something, say something, post a photo, you know, image, video, something I've written, where I've literally been like hovering my finger over the share button, being like, oh, should I do this? Is this too far? Have I gone too far? The witch wound coming out. That's the, what's gonna happen to me? Am I gonna get attacked by internet trolls? Which more often than not, no. Although I have been, for sure. I actually just had an experience very recently on Instagram where I posted a video. It was a clip from a video that I have here on YouTube. And I got brutally attacked by a whole bunch of angry, irritated men online. I know they were angered by what I said. They didn't like what I had to say. Unfortunately, they were not coming for me in a way of giving an intelligent rebuttal to what I said. They decided to personally attack me very cruelly and make up all kinds of wild stories in their mind as to who I was and what I was saying. And it was a lot. I was bombarded with it all at once. Even though it's not actually being burned at the stake, you know, getting these constant attacks thrown at you can be painful. Any human is gonna tell you that when your people are just slinging personal attacks at you, it's gonna hurt, right? Like, I mean, we're human. And honestly, I think some of the things that were coming up for me were not so much, I mean, a lot of things they were saying as far as insults about me, which had nothing to do with the topic. They were just making insults about my appearance, which had nothing to do with the conversation, nothing to do with the video or anything. They wanted to discredit what I was saying because they wanted to attack my physical appearance, which is something that is a very unique female thing, that like somehow our intelligence is, or our knowledge of an area is somehow discredited simply because someone does not find us physically attractive. That's a uniquely female experience in life, let's be real. We don't do that for men. Men can be hideously ugly troll people and we can still say, okay, but at least he's knowledgeable about this. But with women, if a woman says something that might be outside of the social norm, she may get attacked on her physical appearance. But I can tell you from my own experience, especially being in a field like stand-up comedy, where I was considered very conventionally attractive. I was much thinner than I am now, so I was sort of in a societally acceptable body size, so to speak. I was constantly getting told, well, you're too pretty to be funny, or you're too pretty and attractive to be smart, or things like that. Which in reality, I was spending all of my time trying to keep myself in a societally acceptable body size, into making myself look a certain way. So it was taking away from the time I would have to learn new things or to experience new things. So, however, when I put on weight, it was more acceptable that I was funny. Even though at a smaller weight, I wasn't any different as far as my humor and my comedy ability than when I gained weight. But people have this preconceived idea of like what a comedian should look like, or something like that. So the fact that I now spend less time obsessing over keeping myself as thin as possible, and I actually can take more time to learn about new things and new topics, study things and things like that, and then I come online to share them with people, somehow I'm not as knowledgeable because I've put on weight. Which is ironic, because now I actually have more time on my hands to focus on other things besides just constantly being thin all the time. I know that's a tangent, but I'm just talking you through some of the things that were going through my mind when I was getting attacked. The biggest frustration for me, which is something I had to work through, was men that were getting angry at me and coming online and making up these weird elaborate stories about why I came to the conclusion that I did in that video, or why I said what I did in that video. And it was all these stories about like, well, she's obviously slept around with every guy she's ever met, and now she's bitter that she's old and alone, or something, which could not be further from the truth. Trust me, you can ask any guy that I have worked with or known. I don't have a reputation for sleeping around at all. If anything, I have a reputation for being an ice queen and like not putting out. So, and not to say that if someone assumed that I had been promiscuous, that would be inherently terrible. It's just the fact that somebody was making up something about me that was not my truth. Because I'm so big on truth and authenticity, and really being open and vulnerable and sharing my true self with the world, that when somebody decided to come online and like make up stories about me, that, or there were other things. There was another one that was like, don't listen to her, ladies, she makes money off of women staying single. I don't know how that's possible. If single women are required to pay me, then some of you owe me some money, I'm just saying. And like, none of the content that I create is specified specifically for single women. I mean, some of the free content that I make online may be more relatable to women who are single as opposed to women in relationships, but most of the content that I create, which is free online, is created generally for women, but it has nothing to do with whether or not you're in a relationship. And all of the content I've created, my online courses, my new guided journal, all of those things are geared towards women who are either in relationship or not in relationship. So nothing that I'm creating that would be a monetary benefit to me has anything to do with whether or not a woman is single. So I don't know how I make money keeping women single. I mentioned this in another video too, that I wanted to clear up before, that like, I'm not a dating coach, and people will be like, she's a dating coach and she's not even married. Well, I mean, I have been married and I know what being married is like. I know what going through divorce is like. I have some perspectives I can add to people about relationships from what I've learned from that experience. But I'm not a dating coach that's teaching women how to date a bunch of men, or teaching women like, I can teach you how to get married. Although I know how to get married. I did get married. And I know mentally, I don't have to defend myself to everybody. I know consciously that the people who are meant to find my content and who do resonate with me will find me. I have to sit with accepting that there are going to be people out there that are going to say things about me that are untrue, accept that not everybody is going to get what I have to say. And there are going to be a lot of people who don't like what I have to say. There are going to be a lot of people who aren't ready for what I have to say. And I have to sit with that. Like, I have to learn to sit with that and let that sink into my body. But when this was happening and I was getting all this hate, I did start to question myself. I did start to think like, ooh, is this the direction I really want to go in? Like, do I want to stir the pot this much? Like, do I want to anger this many people? Because I know consciously that none of the, in this case, men that were angry about what I was saying were men that I would want in my life. None of them were men that mattered in my life at all. And I know that their anger and their hatred that they were spewing out was not really about me. It was about their own stuff, and they were not ready to hear what I had to say. And I have to accept that But I did start to, you know, having all those insults and that hate just like thrown at me, I did start to question myself. Like, is this what I meant to do? Is this what I meant to talk about? But honestly, in the depths of really asking myself those questions, and in the depths of just being like, can I do this anymore? Do I want to do this anymore? Why am I here? What is my calling? It motivated me to create my Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal. Like, and which is something I am so unbelievably proud of, and I'm so glad that I put that out into the world. But I don't know if I would have gotten there had I not had to ask myself these questions about, like, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right things? Like, who am I and what is my reason for being here? Like, why am I doing this, right? Sometimes it's in that pain and it's in that questioning yourself that you can find your greatest strengths, or you can find your next project, or you can birth a beautiful creative project. Now, I'm talking about this in terms of like my performing career and social media, and some of you may also have some kind of a public career, or you may have a social media platform, and all of this stuff applies to that too, as far as, you know, using your voice and having a witch wound come up. It can also come up in instances of, you know, I've changed my niche on social media plenty of times. And every time that I do, I usually get some kind of pushback from some people. And I have to really ask myself, okay, what is my truth? Like, what can I show up and share with you? And some of you, I'm sure, have social media platforms, and you might be asking yourself, you know, am I just showing up doing things that I think people want me to do, or am I showing up talking about what I'm passionate about? Am I really showing up the way that I want to show up? Maybe a lot of you are, but I think oftentimes, especially as women, we can feel that fear of like, ooh, if I show up the way I really want to show up, what's gonna happen to me? And that fear is normal. That fear, I mean, the fear comes up for me, and I've been doing this stuff for years, for over a decade now. And that stuff still comes up for me, and that's okay. And sometimes when that stuff does come up, again, it can be an invitation to check in with yourself and really just tune into what is your heart telling you. But this stuff is also not just about like big public displays or big speaking out vocally about an important cause. Like, it can be all those things, like, you know, wanting to join a political campaign, or even running for office yourself, or supporting a political candidate, or starting a, you know, a peaceful protest, or starting a nonprofit organization. I mean, those things are all, they're big things, and they're all amazing if you're called to doing that. But this stuff can also come up in simply, you know, are you voicing your full potential at your work, you know, or are you holding back because you're afraid of fully speaking up and sharing some ideas that might be unconventional, you know, at your job? In your own personal relationships, is it speaking up your boundaries, saying what your wants and needs are? Is it actually being able to say no when something doesn't align for you? Those things, I want to say little things, but they're not little things because they're big. Like, they're big things because they can bring up a lot of fear in us. What if we get abandoned? What if we get rejected? All those things that they can come up in us. But like, what if we get burned at the stake? Like, what if we, like, it's those fears that can come up in us, so we hold back. And I want you to know that those fears are normal, and they're important to work through, because your truth and being able to speak your truth and speak up about things that are important to you, it's so important. It's so important that you be able to do that. So fear is normal, and tuning into your heart and really feeling into when it's a time to face that fear, or when maybe it's actually legitimate fear that maybe is telling you to go in a different direction. And that leads me into the next area where witch wounds very frequently come up, and that is in women's intuition. I think of intuition as the heart space. Some people think of intuition as the third eye. I kind of, generally speaking, I like to kind of keep the feminine kind of out of the mind, because the feminine, as women, we tend to get way too much in the mind. And the mind, which is our masculine energy, can be great, but I really like to encourage women to drop into the body. So I think of intuition as being heart wisdom. It's in your heart space. I do think that women's intuition is more accepted now in society, but that's a really recent thing. It's a really recent phenomenon when it comes to the world today. I actually was just watching a movie, Rear Window, with Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart. And Grace Kelly was actually talking about her intuition, and there was a detective that was like, yeah, that women's intuition stuff sells magazines, but it ain't real, or something like that. But it was a realization that's not that long ago in our history that women's intuition was totally discredited. And there is scientific backing to the presence of women's intuition. So I've talked to like PhD psychologists about this topic, and it's not just some like woo-woo phenomenon. There's actual scientific evidence for it. As women, we have a heightened sense of intuition, but that gets rejected in a lot of areas. Like, it absolutely gets rejected. Women are very disconnected from their bodies, and our intuition is in our body. You can think of it as like a gut reaction, or, in the heart space, or tuning into your heart, or things like that. It's going to be different for everybody. Some people connect it to their womb, but as women in society, we're very much disconnected from our own bodies. We can be objectified, for one. Oftentimes in Western medicine, women's bodies are just completely ignored or rejected, or just over medicated to change our bodies. And I'm not gonna say this to like reject Western medicine. I go into this a little bit more in the Dark Feminine Archetypes video when I talk about the witch. Oftentimes as women, we were burned as witches, really, because we were midwives, because we were medicine women. And Western medicine, which was primarily male dominated, and still is to a great degree, wanted to step in and take over. So these women that had these healing potions were labeled as witches, and then that we kind of created in our society this idea that, of the hocus pocus, like let's steal children's souls and have a cauldron and blah blah blah, when in reality the basis of it was essentially women using nature to heal. Oftentimes, I know we just recently lost Suzanne Summers, who was a big advocate in holistic health. People who choose to do things holistically can very often get shunned by society. I believe personally that if Western medicine and holistic medicine could work together, we would heal a lot more people. My own personal view. I don't discredit either one, and I also believe very strongly you should never blindly follow either one. I don't think you should blindly follow doctors, because doctors can be wrong, and I think it's really important to find people you trust, find people who are comfortable with you asking questions, find people who you feel like are actually working in your best interests. But I also think when you're dealing with somebody who is like a holistic specialist, you have to be just as careful, you have to be just as mindful. So none of this is about like don't trust doctors, but only trust holistic people. There's good and bad seeds in both sides. We've seen it especially recently in our society, where people start questioning Western medicine, pharmaceutical companies, things like that, and just asking the question then gets shunned. We see it often with women, we see it often with mothers and dealing with their children, and they're told to just follow the science, which is ironic, because the basis of science is asking questions and then answering them with evidence. So the idea that you cannot question science is actually anti-science. There's a lot of people who have been very vocal about speaking out about this, and a lot of people who have lost families, friendships, relationships over speaking up about questioning the societal norm when it came to mandates and things around that nature. And I'm not going to get into a debate about that, but it's really important for you to tune in and check in with yourself, check in with your intuition, and check in with what you feel like is right for your body, particularly for mothers out there, checking in with what you believe is the correct thing for your child. Nobody knows what's best for your child better than you do, and nobody knows what's best for your own body better than you do. Not to say you should discredit people who have done research, who have extensive knowledge in certain areas. You can use those people to help inform you, but the final decision should always be yours. And that's not something that we really talk about in society today. Women's reproductive health, and I'm not going to dive into all of the different areas that are very controversial that goes into. However, there are a lot of ways that we take away a woman's bodily autonomy in our society in a lot of different ways. We take over childbirth, we take over child rearing in a lot of ways that may not be natural for a woman to do things And I'm not necessarily making a statement about what's right or what's wrong. We convince people, especially women, especially in the medical community, to not be able to make decisions with their own body. And we also don't give women informed consent nearly enough, telling women all of the side effects, giving a woman a printout of all the different side effects of birth control, and then just telling her that going on birth control will fix her problems or fix her hormonal problems, when in reality it doesn't fix them, and there's a whole lot of other side effects that might come along with that. Again, if someone is going to choose to do something like, say, birth control or something, that's not necessarily right or wrong. However, I do think that the way that we really either misinform women or don't give women the full story so that they can have informed consent in a lot of different areas in the medical industry, I think that's a shame. And I'm saying this because we tend to tell women, just follow your doctor, or just follow this advice, or just do what your husband tells you to do, or just, you know, do what the teachers are telling you, or what your child's pediatrician is telling you what to do. I mean, we don't really allow women the space to tune into their intuition, tune into their body, because more often than not, as women, our body knows way more than we give it credit for. Think about it like this. If you really look back on your life and you look at the things that have happened to you in your life, things that have gone wrong, and you ask yourself honestly, before that person hurt me, or before that person screwed me over, or before that thing went wrong, was there a voice inside me that told me that was going to happen? Most of the time you're going to say yes. Most of the time, if you were really tuning in and you were really asking yourself and you were really being honest with yourself, you could probably acknowledge that, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. But as women, we tend to get trained to ignore that intuition, to ignore that voice inside of us that's saying, this doesn't feel right, or this is unsafe, or this is something that doesn't feel right for me, or ooh, this feels like it's gonna go wrong. We convince women to ignore that voice, that we're just paranoid, that we're just crazy, right? We love to label women as that. It's really important to tune in and listen to that voice, because I can tell you that that voice, if it's coming from your soul, not from your ego or your pain or your trauma, and I have a video where I dive into that more, the differences between that and stuff, but like it's really coming from your soul, that voice isn't gonna be wrong. It's never wrong. Like your soul voice, your soul intuition, which is hard to find sometimes as women because we're very disconnected from it. But when you tune into that, it's not gonna steer you wrong. It's always gonna guide you in the right direction. Your ego is not a good leader. Your ego, your trauma, your pain, not a good leader. Your intuition, always, always, always gonna lead you in the right direction. And as women, we tend to ignore that because we don't wanna stir the pot. We don't wanna go against the norm, against convention, right? That's the witch wound. That's the, oh no, if I do something unconventional, or I speak up and do something that's different, or I don't do what they're telling me to do with my kids all the time, or things like that, we think we'll be shunned, we'll be burned, we'll be, you know, attacked by torch-wielding villagers. Check in with yourself. Your intuition is one of your greatest gifts. That is the part of feminine energy that we need to be really tapping into. Even though it's the most natural thing in the world for a feminine core being, it's still considered so taboo in our society today. And I think it's time we reclaim that. We need to reclaim our women's intuition and our heart wisdom. Okay, the final area that I want to talk about when it comes to the witch wound is our sexuality. Okay, we were in the voice and the throat, we kind of tapped into our heart wisdom, and now we're gonna get down into the womb and the sexy parts, right? I mentioned this actually in my dark feminine energy archetype video, talking about the archetype of the sacred slut, which is really like our dark sexual part of our feminine energy. And as I mentioned in that video, it's actually ironic that we have this weird dichotomy of the good girl, bad girl in our society. And we accept that there are women who are good girls. They're like the wife material. They're the ones who are, you know, they dress modestly and they stay virgins until they're married and they don't get turned on sexually and they, you know, whatever, like the good girl, the virginal type. And in our society, we accept that there are women, and I hate this term, but we'll say like for the streets, like the women who are like just all about sex and who just, you know, are willing to exploit themselves or objectify themselves for male pleasure. And men are like, okay, those are the women that you sleep with. There's the women that you marry, but you're never really gonna have a good sexual connection with them because they're tuned off from their sexuality. And then there's the women that you sleep with, and like, I wouldn't want to be married to her because she's probably not gonna be loyal to me and she's been run through, or all those stupid things that they say. But like, I wanna fool around with her, but I ain't gonna marry her. I'm not gonna wife her. Like that whole kind of ridiculous dichotomy. But in our society, we are not comfortable at all with a woman who embodies her sexuality but also holds herself in a high enough regard to know that she's only going to share that sexuality with a person who she deems worthy of that, which should be the way that all women are. Like, all women should be able to embody their just delicious sexual energy, but also own the absolute beauty and sacredness of their powerful feminine body enough to know not to share that with someone who is not worthy of that. Like, that's how all women should operate. But yet we're not comfortable with that. We're comfortable with the two extremes. We're comfortable with the woman being the good girl or the woman being the bad girl, like the virgin and the whore. But we're not comfortable with a woman who embodies both. And even though this is not about men, this is about women and this is about you, in reality, that's what men want. A healthy, embodied, masculine man who is not living from ego is gonna want a woman to partner with that has sexual energy, but is also only going to share that sexual energy with a man she deems worthy, and he wants to be the man who she deems worthy, and he's also willing to prove his worth. Like, that's a healthy relationship right there. Embodying that as a woman is actually beneficial to like a healthy masculine man. Now, as women, we should be doing that for ourselves. So this isn't about men. I'm not trying to make this about finding a man, but I do know there are women out there who do want to be in a healthy relationship with a man. And the only way you're really going to ever find a healthy relationship with a man, you could find a relationship with a man being in one of the two extremes. You may be the complete virginal, shut down your sexual energy person, and you may find a man who might wife you. That kind of a man that's going to marry a woman like that is probably going to keep watching porn. He's probably going to keep following women on OnlyFans. He's probably gonna keep checking out other women. He may even start having affairs because he's longing for sexual energy that the good girl is never going to be able to bring to him because she shut off all of her sexual energy. She may sleep with him, but she's not going to be able to embody that sexual energy. If you were a woman who falls into the other extreme where you're willing to objectify yourself for men and you're willing to become overly sexual, or you may even be using promiscuity as an addiction to distract yourself from the pain in your life. I call that the Samantha Jones syndrome. If you're a Sex and the City fan, you'll know what I mean. You may find a guy who's willing to sleep with you, spend time with you. He might be willing to hook up with you. You might be able to get a lot of male attention and male validation temporarily, but you're not going to find a healthy relationship because the kind of men that are going to be drawn to you in that state are going to be guys who don't have any sexual discipline, guys who probably don't respect you as a human, who are just willing to use your body. And eventually you're going to get tired of that, because I know as women we want to pretend that, oh, I don't care if this man just uses me for my body, but eventually you're going to care. Eventually it's going to wear down on you because they're going to keep taking your energy, and men that show up and sleep with you in that state are they're gonna be energy vampires. They're gonna steal your energy and use your sexual energy and just leave you depleted. And as the feminine, we need to feel full. We need to feel fullness. We don't want to feel depleted. That is why as women, when we want to tap into that sexual energy, we want to tap into that sexual energy with a man that is going to fill us and not drain us of our energy, of our sexual essence. Like, we want a man who's going to fill us up with the love and the passion and the masculine presence that we truly desire. So in the world we're in today, being a woman who owns her worth, who owns the beautiful power of her feminine body and has a connection to her divine, sacred, sexual energy, no matter how dark, sexual, slutty, whatever it is, she has that. She's tapped into that. She's tapped into that beautiful, divine, sacred sexuality, and she owns the beautiful feminine power of her body, and she only is willing to share that with those who she deems worthy of that. that is a radical act in our society today. And that can bring up a lot of shame and judgment in us. Other women may shame and judge us for that because they shame and judge that part of themselves. And you can get that from either side. If you have women who are the good girl, who have shut off their sexuality, they're gonna feel your sexuality and they're gonna judge it because they judge their own. Because they are rejecting their own. They're not tapped into their own. So they're gonna judge you for yours, because we often judge other people for things that we aren't comfortable with in ourselves. And you may get judgments from women on the other side, the quote unquote bad girl persona, because they may resent the fact that you own your worth, that you're not willing to share that sexuality with everybody, because in reality, they haven't fully owned theirs. So they're gonna resent women who are fully owning theirs, right? So as women who do embody that beautiful sacred sexuality that embrace both the sacred and the sexual part of their sacred sexuality, they can often get a lot of hate and rejection from women on both sides, because oftentimes we tend to judge those who are embodying things that we wish we had within ourselves, or we were comfortable in within ourselves, right? And I know that's difficult. It's really difficult when we get hate from other women. I almost feel like that hurts worse than when we get hate from men. I don't know. I feel like as women we should kind of be in this together, but you know, that's just the girl's girl in me. It's also important to acknowledge that when we are getting judged or shamed by another woman, more often than not, it's because they resent something in us that they are not comfortable with within themselves, and it's their thing to work through. I know it can be hard and painful when they start spewing hate or judgments or things like that onto you. I know it's painful, believe me, I feel that. Usually that's themselves. It's the stuff that they're trying to deal with in themselves. And I know it can be easy to like judge and shame them back, but in reality it's just wishing them healing and hoping that one day they'll figure that out for themselves. Obviously, anything connected to our sacred sexuality can bring up stuff from men, right? There are going to be a lot of men who are just not comfortable with women who own their worth when it comes to their sexuality, because men, weak men typically, are going to want easy access to that. Now, a truly healthy embodied masculine man is going to respect a woman who owns the worthiness of her sexuality, but a weak man is going to expect something for nothing. He's going to expect her to share that sexuality with him and to prove that he's worthy when he hasn't done anything to earn that. And also, there are going to be a lot of men in their egos that want to control a woman's sexuality. They want to be in control of it, whether they want to be in control of her not sharing that sexuality and they want to suppress it, or they can't control themselves around a woman's sexuality and they resent her for showing that sexuality. That comes up a lot too. I've talked about the dangers of porn consumption and things like that on my channel, which is really a huge problem that's going on with men right now. Men are so conditioned with porn culture to see women's sexuality as solely for their pleasure. When men watch porn, which the average age that men start watching porn is age 11. So from age 11 on, men have been conditioned to see women as sexual objects, not as sexual partners. And when men do see women who are embodying their sexuality, they often automatically go to objectifying them. I mean, they've been conditioning their brain since childhood to see women as sexual objects. So when a woman is actually fully embodying her sexuality, oftentimes men revert to objectifying them. And that doesn't help anybody, because as a woman, becoming an object in your sexuality is never going to give you that deep sexual energy that we desire. There's a lot of evidence out there, and it makes sense if you think about it, that women are much more sexual beings than men are. However, what women crave in sex is different than what men crave in sex. Generally speaking, men are craving quantity and women are craving quality. In reality, men are addicted to ejaculation. It's not really about the sex, it's about just being addicted to that one little moment of, and that's it. Women have so much sexual depth, but most women are only ever partnered with a man who is just addicted to that quick, which they learn from porn, really, because, you know, when men are watching porn, they're usually doing it in secret. They're usually trying to get the sex over with quickly and just get to that one little moment of pleasure and then it's done. They're not used to actually connecting deeply in intimacy with a woman. So most women have only experienced their sexuality with men who are just conditioned to just get it over with quick and then move on. So women never really tap into the full depths of their sexuality. Women are more sexual creatures, but most women suppress that because they feel like they're never going to partner with a man that's really going to just enter their depths and to really connect with them in pleasure, or be with a man who prioritizes her pleasure. I'm getting into a whole other topic here about sexuality, but again, we have very much conditioned women to believe that their sexuality is solely for male validation or male pleasure, and we shut women off from that completely. So when we do have a woman in society who owns the sacredness of her body and embodies her beautiful, just vibrant sexual energy, that woman is typically shunned in society. Women aren't comfortable with it. Men don't know how to handle it typically. I have a breakdown of the film Milena, which talks about this topic much deeper. If that is not an example of the witch wound, I don't know what is. Like that idea of a woman who is shunned from society simply because she is a beautiful woman, you know, and she has to shut that down in her life because it's not safe for her. For women, oftentimes expressing that sexual energy doesn't feel safe because most men in society have been conditioned to think that female sexuality equals objectification. So as women, it's hard to really show up and really embody that sexual energy. And I'm not talking about walking around in a thong twerking in the streets. I'm talking about just like showing up as a sexual being. It's hard for most women to do that, and it does tend to get women shunned from society, and tapping into sexuality is a very, very taboo thing. Even just talking about a woman's sexuality is very taboo, even when it's not graphic. You know, it's always seen as something that is for male validation. I mean, look, I was an Instagram lingerie model for a long time, and I never ever created content that was for men. I created it for women because I wanted to inspire women to be comfortable in their own skin and to tap into their own sexuality and to feel sexy. Men did not know how to handle it. They did not know how to see that without objectifying it. Not all men, but a lot of them. And I can tell you it was a lot. It stirred up a lot of stuff in me. It stirred up a lot of stuff in people. And I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna do a video talking about body image and weight and things like that, but I do want to touch on this topic. I mean, we do have issues with obesity in this country, and I don't want to dive into the way that we are completely distorted in the way that we view women and the way that we view women's bodies and things like that. We do have an epidemic in this country, in America, of people with weight problems, and there's a lot of complicated things that go with that. I could go through a laundry list of things that I believe are contributing factors. However, a very common reason why women gain weight, and this is not necessarily like a conscious thing, it can be, but it's usually something that is an unconscious activity that we participate in, is women often gain weight as a protective measure. It's literally a way to protect her body by putting a layer of fat over her body to protect her from threats from the outside. And that can very often happen when women have gone through sexual trauma, or women feel like it is unsafe in the world because she's being sexually objectified. She very often will put on weight as a protective shield. I've been guilty of that and probably doing that right now as a reaction to being so objectified when I was an Instagram lingerie model. There's a lot of factors that have gone into my weight fluctuations and things that I know most of the people that watch my YouTube videos, and if you've been watching this long, you're probably not someone who's here just to attack me. But I do get this on social media and my shorter clips and stuff from people who love to throw jabs at my weight and my weight gain and things like that. I'm not gonna lie, that's something that's for sure a factor, not the only factor, but a factor in why I have put on weight in the past couple of years is because of the constant objectification. And that's not the only thing. There's a lot of physical ailments and physical things in our body that can show up because of a lot of these emotional things that we go through. It's just another example of ways that women are shunned in society, and that this witch wound where we feel unsafe in society some way, somehow, we change who we are, or we become something, or we shut down, or we close off. I mean, I shut down my sexuality completely while I was a stand-up comic. I absolutely completely shut down my sexuality like in my workspace, but in my real life, because I didn't have a work-life thing figured out. I shut down my sexuality completely because I was being sexually objectified. I was around so many men. I was around a lot of men who did not really know how to deal with women properly. And I just shut that down because it was not safe for me to show up as a sexual woman because I would just get objectified. It's that feeling of being unsafe because, again, one of the reasons why women were burned as witches was because they were deemed to be too sexual for the church, so to speak. And yeah, that stuff can all come up. It can come up for us. It can come up in us shutting down, us going into freeze mode. It can, you know, be women just cutting off their sexuality. It can be women who just start embracing being objectified. It might go in the other direction. It might be women who are afraid to tap into their intuition, so they turn over all of their power to other people, their doctor, their husband, their father, somebody. They turn over all of their power to somebody else because they just assume that they must know better than they do, and they don't actually learn to tap into their own intuition and their own body. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have other people in your life that you trust their opinion and people who can weigh in on things, but when something is regarding you and your body, you should always have a say, and you should always be able to tap into your intuition. So again, like the vocal, like speaking, your feminine intuition and then being able to speak that are tied together, and also your sexuality. Those are the most common ways that the witch wound shows up in us as women. I know I got off on a bunch of tangents in this, but yeah, these are all normal. And even I mean, someone like me who's done a lot of healing work around this, and someone who has faced a lot of these things head on, has made careers out of facing some of these things in some instances, things still come up for me. In fact, you know, again, I had a social media post where I got attacked recently that I almost just completely like shut down everything because I was like, maybe this just isn't for me, because I just was getting so attacked. And I realized that the people who were attacking me were the people who, I mean, they were kind of proving my point. It's like the fact that I angered these people and that they reacted this way was actually a sign I was doing something right. I actually just recently released my Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal. You can find it on Amazon. It's available now. And I will admit, when I launched that book, a lot of stuff came up for me. Ooh, are people gonna think I'm like promoting some kind of like satanic book or something about, you know, demons and whatever, which is not what the book is at all. I was like, ooh, is the world ready for this? Am I gonna get shunned? Am I gonna get criticized? You know, I mean, a lot of this stuff came up for me. And, you know, I realized that I was like, no, this is something I'm passionate about. I believe the world needs this. And I went through with it anyway. And it didn't mean I didn't have fears. This stuff comes up. And it was funny because I actually remember saying it out loud at one point that I was like, I can't believe in 2023, as a woman, I have this much fear creating a guided journal for women to help inspire them to improve their life. And the fact that this would even be controversial in this day and age is just so strange to me. But the fear still came up, and I had to acknowledge the fear, I had to own the fear, and I had to realize that this is something that's really important, and I had to move forward anyway. So if the fears come up for you, if the witch wound is something that you resonate with and it comes up for you, it's totally normal. It's totally normal. It doesn't mean that you're not healed. It means you're human. And I would just invite you to use it as an invitation to just check in with yourself. Check in with yourself and see if, you know, you are on the right direction or you are in the right path, and if this is something that is really worth it to you. If stepping forward, maybe the answer is not now. Maybe the answer is, hell yes, I want to do this. Maybe the answer is, no, I don't want to do this anymore. Listen to that. Trust your intuition. It will not guide you wrong. Yeah, if you have any you know, experiences with the witch wound or anything like that, feel free to use your throat chakra, to use your voice, and let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you. I actually love that there's this beautiful community of women that are commenting on my videos, and I'm getting to connect with, and I'm loving that about social media. I know I took some time off from social media because I really needed to like reset my brain and stuff. The witch wound was for sure coming up for me a lot, and I needed to kind of like regroup, so I did take a while where I wasn't posting as much, and I did get banned off from TikTok for copyright stuff, which was still kind of like, it's a witch wound stuff, like, you know, oh, I'm getting banned, I'm getting silenced, and, you know, it was stuff that came up for me, but, you know, I'm loving growing my TikTok again and, you know, finding people on there again and, you know, making videos here and talking to beautiful women who comment on my videos. So just so you know, I truly appreciate all of you that are watching and all of you that are here. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. If you'd like to join my new TikTok account or follow any of my social media accounts, details in the description box below. If you would like to check out my Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, I'm so passionate about it, and I know that it's going to be healing for so many women. So if you'd like to check that out on Amazon, details in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.